This is the play that's about to get ran against us on illegal immigration.
All right, let's see it.
Progressives will use weaponized empathy to emotionally manipulate Christians and confuse us.
So I think there's absolutely such a thing as weaponized empathy, but this particular appeal to it is little more than a disingenuous and an ignorant bit of rhetorical prophylaxis for bigotry and ethnocentrism and nativism. Because weaponized empathy is when you leverage empathy to try to excuse or enable or facilitate real harm done to other folks. So, for instance, a judge freeing a rapist because slapping a teenager with a rape charge would destroy his otherwise promising athletic future. That's an example of leveraging empathy to excuse very real and very serious harm done to others. Refusing to take guns away from people who have threatened intimate partners because it would be mean to take guns away from people who really like to play with guns is an example of leveraging empathy to facilitate and enable very real harm that then gets done to other folks. A blanket pardon of anyone and everyone who engaged in a violent insurrection in an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding of Congress so that the results of a free and fair election could be overturned is an example of weaponized empathy. And particularly because an awful lot of those people were tried and convicted of violent felonies. They put many people in the hospital, and this resulted in multiple deaths. And suggesting that just because they were on our ideological team, we should empathize with them and excuse their very real, very violent crimes, that's weaponized empathy. And I think it can extend to empathy shown to undocumented immigrants that results in or excuses very real harm done to other people. But those examples are in the overwhelming minority. However, attempting to dismiss and invalidate as weaponized empathy any and all concern that we show mercy and empathy to undocumented immigrants and legal immigrants and even native-born U.S. citizens, many of whom from all these groups are children and many of whom have never committed any criminal offenses whatsoever, is just rhetorical prophylaxis for bigotry.
So first, the Bible does tell us to love immigrants, of course, but we can show love without enabling lawbreakers or sacrificing our own security, just like we love alcoholics, but we still enforce DUI laws.
So this is more disingenuous and ignorant rhetorical prophylaxis for bigotry, and there are a few different rhetorical tactics going on here. For instance, there is the false analogy of comparing immigration laws to DUI laws, because DUI laws are enforced because driving under the influence represents a direct threat to the health and safety of others. Immigration laws are not enforced because illegal immigration represents a direct threat to the health and safety of others. In fact, it reduces the threat to others because every study that's ever been conducted shows that undocumented immigrants commit crimes at lower rates than native-born Americans. So the notion that we have to enforce these laws, which ultimately are either civil offenses and not criminal offenses, or are misdemeanors if they are criminal offenses, because otherwise we're going to harm other people, that's just not true. That's a falsehood. But that's got to be ignored, and we're going to do so by comparing it to a law whose enforcement actually protects other people who are out there on the road. Another thing that's going on is this creator has to be very selective about what they're going to allow from the Bible, because there are a bunch of parts of the Bible that flatly undermine their claims. There are a bunch of parts about mercy, about freeing the imprisoned and the oppressed. You have in James 2:13, judgment will be without mercy to those who have shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. We don't want to talk about that at all because that complicates this notion that we have to enforce in a draconian and in an oppressive manner these laws about civil offenses and misdemeanors. Because really what's going on here is opposition to illegal immigration has become an identity marker for Christian nationalism, and so the more vociferously and the more histrionically we defend that identity marker, the more we show other members of the in-group that we are really committed. It's credibility-enhancing displays. It's costly signaling. What it is not is particularly informed or thoughtful or at all merciful.
Second, God is the one who establishes nations and borders.
That's not really clearly established in the Bible, and there are a number of places where that could be challenged, particularly in the Hebrew Bible. This is another post-biblical dogma that is just trying to leverage the authority of the Bible.
The whole book of Nehemiah features a nation rebuilding its walls. And we build walls for the same reason you have a lock on your front door. Not because you hate the people on the outside, but because you love the people on the inside.
Entirely false. The book of Nehemiah is about rebuilding the walls of a city, namely Jerusalem, and not in order to keep people out, but because the walls are symbolic of the integrity of the identity of the Jewish people. Nehemiah says, let us rebuild them so we no longer suffer this disgrace. The walls are symbolic. It's not because they're trying to keep people out. And additionally, in this time period, nations were more ethnically determined. This was about the Jewish people. This was not about a pluralistic or a secular nation like the United States is. And finally, the book of Nehemiah has a very strong ethnocentric dimension where it's trying to maintain the ethnic purity of the Judahite people. And this is because they are a minoritized, marginalized, oppressed ethnic identity, and sometimes you have to circle the wagons in order to protect a threatened identity. The United States of America, not a threatened ethnic identity. So trying to leverage the book of Nehemiah in order to say, hey, we should be building walls and we should be keeping the dirty foreigners out so they don't muddy up our blood, is profoundly bigoted and has no place in a pluralistic secular society like the United States of America. But additionally, if you look at the origins of immigration legislation in the United States, it precisely arises out of a concern for and a desire to keep undesired ethnic groups out. In 1790, we have some of the first immigration laws, which are primarily about keeping out black folks who are not slaves. When we get to the late 19th and the early 20th century, we have a desire to let certain groups in, but to keep out Asians and Africans and Italians and Eastern Europeans. So our immigration laws originate precisely in hate for the groups that we don't want to see entering into our country.
If strangers started sneaking in your back door or climbing in unlocked windows, it would be unloving towards your own family to overlook that.
Another wildly false analogy that is just more disingenuous and ignorant rhetorical prophylaxis for this bigoted identity marker that these content creators want to wave as histrionically as they can in front of other Christian nationalists so that they can put on display their fidelity to the social identity and its norms and its mores. If you wanted a more accurate analogy, you'd have to recognize that undocumented immigrants pay an awful lot of taxes. Undocumented immigrants do the jobs that native-born Americans don't like to do. Undocumented immigrants, again, commit crimes at lower rates than native-born Americans. So the analogy would have to be something more like an abused or a homeless couple sneaks in my back door with their kids and starts doing all our chores for us and pays us money, and they also disobey at lower rates than my own children do. That would be more accurate, and that doesn't happen. But that's what exposes this as a false analogy and just ignorant and misguided rhetorical prophylaxis for bigotry.
Immigration has made our country great, and we continue to welcome legal immigrants.
As long as they don't come from shithole countries. And also, legal immigrants as well as native-born U.S. citizens are going to be swept up in these raids because there's just no way that you can brutalize undocumented immigrants without also accidentally violating the rights of legal immigrants and U.S. citizens. But hey, the priority here is terror. It's not actually preserving or protecting the rights of the people who are legally in our nation.
But when people break the law, there are consequences.
Yes, for instance, if you're a white male billionaire who is a rapist, whom everyone heard boast about being able to sexually assault women with impunity because of your celebrity, and you commit dozens of felonies and you are found to have committed fraud numerous times around the country, the consequence is that you are made the President of the United States of America, and everybody excuses and facilitates and enables the very real harm that you cause to other people because you're on the right team.
The gospel shows us it's the upholding of justice that allows for the extension of mercy.
Let's revisit the prophetic critique, where prophets said that folks who were putting on display their fidelity to the nation's rules while also grinding the faces of the poor and the oppressed and the orphan and the widow and the needy were committing sin. Let's revisit Jesus's repeated reference to Hosea 6:6 in the prophetic critique when he says, I will have mercy and not sacrifice. Let's revisit James 2:13. Here it is from the NRSV UE. For judgment will be without mercy to anyone who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. Right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation are for intellectual and emotional adolescents, and you need to grow the hell up and learn how to think critically and Google competently.
The reason people want to come to America is because our laws promote human flourishing and freedom.
And yet, what you're advocating for here, over and directly against the Christian message, as well as those laws that facilitate the flourishing of human dignity and freedom, is more oppressive, brutalizing, and dehumanizing laws and their enforcement.
So we welcome people to come, but they have to be invited in the front door.
If you're going to assert that, then stop maliciously withholding the invitation only because it serves as an identity marker for your petty and naive right-wing authoritarian and social dominance orientation identity politics. And the fit for this video has been Rogue and Gambit forever.